Stage 5. Lesson 59. Lie, comfortable, uncomfortable. Is the book standing on the table?
No, the book isn't standing on the table, but it's lying on the table.
How long do you usually lie in bed at night for?
I usually lie in bed at night for about 8 hours.
Is it more comfortable to sleep lying down or sitting up?
It's more comfortable to sleep lying down than sitting up.
Wake up immediately. Do you generally wake up early?
Yes, I generally wake up early. Or, no, I don't generally wake up early.
What's the first thing you see when you wake up?
The first thing I see when I wake up is the ceiling.
Do you usually get up immediately after you wake up?
No, I don't usually get up immediately after I wake up, but I lie in bed for a few minutes.
Through, button. What am I doing?
You're putting your pen through the buttonhole of your jacket.
Do you like walking through the streets in the rain?
Yes, I like walking through the streets in the rain. Or, no, I don't like walking through the streets in the rain.
If you went from London to Rome, which cities would you perhaps have to go through?
If I went from London to Rome, I would perhaps have to go through Paris, Milan, etc.
Cross, crossroads. What's this?
It's a cross.
Do you write your name with a cross?
No, I don't write my name with a cross.
Why not?
Because people would not understand it, and besides, I know how to write.
Are there any crossroads at the end of the street where you live?
Yes, there are some crossroads at the end of the street where I live. Or, no, there aren't any crossroads at the end of the street where I live.
Danger, dangerous, dangerously, detective, James. What colour do we use for danger?
We use red for danger.
Do you think the roads are less dangerous these days than they were in the past?
No, I don't think the roads are less dangerous these days than they were in the past, but I think they're more dangerous.
Why?
Because there are more cars on the roads these days than in the past.
Would you like to live dangerously like a detective? Somebody like James Bond or Sherlock Holmes, for example?
Yes, I would like to live dangerously like a detective. Or no, I wouldn't like to live dangerously like a detective.
Ought, alternative, under a moral obligation. In these two sentences, I must study and I ought to study, the first sentence means that I have no alternative. I must study. Whilst the second sentence means that I have an alternative. I can go to the cinema if I like, or for a walk, but I am under a moral obligation to study. It would be a good thing if I studied. What's the difference between these two sentences? I must study and I ought to study.
The difference between those two sentences is that the first sentence means that I have no alternative, whilst the second sentence means I have an alternative, but I am under a moral obligation to study.
How do we translate I must study?
We translate I must study with io devo studiare.
And how do we translate I ought to study?
We translate I ought to study with io dovrei studiare.
Do you think people ought to be polite in the shops and streets?
Yes, I think people ought to be polite in the shops and streets.
Do you agree that pupils ought to study hard?
Yes, I agree that pupils ought to study hard.
Do you agree that young people ought to help the old?
Yes, I agree that young people ought to help the old.
What ought we to do when somebody is dangerously ill?
When somebody is dangerously ill, we ought to put him to bed and call for a doctor.
What do you think one ought to do if one wanted to earn a lot of money?
I think one ought to work hard or go into business if one wanted to earn a lot of money.
Cause, think of, freedom, justice. What do you think causes war?
I think, perhaps, the fact that some countries are rich and strong, whilst others are poor and weak, causes war.
Can you think of a cause for which you would be willing to die? If so, Which?
Yes, I can think of a cause for which I would be willing to die. The cause of freedom, for example.
What kind of causes do people usually die for?
People usually die for the causes of freedom or of justice.
As. As we have now studied about 1,000 words and a lot of the grammar, can you hold a simple conversation in English?
Yes, as we have now studied about 1,000 words and a lot of the grammar, I can hold a simple conversation in English.
As you are not tall enough to touch the ceiling, what would you have to do if you wanted to touch it?
As I am not tall enough to touch the ceiling, I would have to put a chair on the table and stand on the chair if I wanted to touch it.
That is. Give me a sentence with that is.
We went to their house after the cinema. That is the house where they lived until last week.
Bone. Have you ever broken any of the bones in your body?
Yes, I've broken some bones in my body. Or, no, I've never broken any of the bones in my body.
Although. Make a sentence with although.
Although I've seen the film before, I would willingly see it again.
Although you're now able to hold a simple conversation in English, do you think you ought to keep studying?
Yes, although I'm now able to hold a simple conversation in English, I think I ought to keep studying.
Do you think people can be happy although they are poor?
Yes, I think people can be happy although they are poor. Or, no, I don't think people can be happy although they are poor.
Cook. Can you cook?
Yes, I can cook. Or, no, I can't cook.
Such as. Give me a sentence with the words such as.
I like reading all kinds of books, such as history books, science books, etc.
Independent. Do you think that all the countries in the world ought to be independent?
Yes, I think that all the countries in the world ought to be independent. Or, no, I don't think that all the countries in the world ought to be independent.
Origin. Do you know the origin of the flag of your country?
Yes, I know the origin of the flag of my country. Or, no, I don't know the origin of the flag of my country.